Xilonen's full kit details are finally here, and with that we know she's a super strong Geo character. The element might be saved.
Hello there, Flip here, and today we're going to be talking about Xilonen, breaking down why she's so good, as well as looking into all our potential team options stemming from her kit. But before we do that, as always, if at any point during the video you're entertained or informed, make sure to drop a like and even consider subscribing, as I talk on various topics regarding Genshin's meta and I'll try to keep you updated. And with that, let's begin. To explain her kit in more detail, Xilonen is a 5-star Geo Sword user, and as standard her normal attacks don't really do anything. Actually, that's a lie. First, her plunge damage is going to be scaling off of her defense instead of attack. And unlike Kenichi and Mualani who have their Night Soul Blessing scalings in their skill, for example Mualani with her Shark Bites, all of her Night Soul Blessing scaling besides the initial cast will be on her normal attack talent. But I guess I should tell you what that does. When you cast her skill, Xilonen will hop on rollerblades, no I am not joking, and after an initial blunt of damage she will gain 45 Night Soul points and enter her Night Soul Blessing state, which increases all of her movement speed and allows her to jump high and also gives her infinite stamina when climbing in Natlin, which she's going to need for our recreational pegging appointment. And of course she can attack in this state. In terms of how good she'll be as a DPS, we don't know, as it's not clear as we don't have her attack speeds. What is super important however, and is what makes her so good, are her source samples. Her samples are going to start as Geo, and depending on the element of your party members, her samples will be converted to the matching element besides Anemo and Dendro. So for example, on a Hu Tao Yuan Furina team you should end up with 2 Hydro samples and 1 Pyro one. But if you're using something like Hu Tao Yuan Kazaha, since an Anemo sample can't be created, it would stay as Geo. These samples are important as they will debuff nearby enemies to give a 36% resistance shred at level 10. They cannot be stacked though, so whether you have 1 or 2 Pyro samples, it will always be a 36% resistance shred to the corresponding element. Another thing to note is that her samples will need to be activated for this to occur, and they will start unactivated.
So how do you activate them?
Wow, shut the fuck up, I'm getting there, how rude. The way you activate these samples is through maximizing her Night Soul points of 90. Since she starts with 45 when you use her skill, you just need to get 45 more, which is possible through the first part of her Ascension 1, where if 2 samples have been converted to another element from Geo, when she hits an opponent she will generate 35 Night Soul points. So you're going to use her skill, attack twice, and then boom, free 36% resistance shred. If you have less than 1 sample converted though, for example in 3 Geo teams, she will then have her own damage increased by 30%. So again, she has 2 very distinct playstyles. You can either use her as a DPS or as a support. Now most of this was already pretty well known info. What wasn't known though, however, is the fact that she has an elemental burst that with 2 samples converted will heal. What? I calculate that she'll be healing for around 6k a tick on Favonia's sword with 2 defense main stats. This is a single target heal and we don't know yet how often it ticks, but assuming it is more than like 4, I think it's pretty solid healing, especially for non-HP scalers. The reason why this is so insane though regardless is that it means she can be a decent form of sustain for your team, and it also means she can synergize well with Furina on top of shredding resistances by 36%, and on top of being able to use the scroll set for even further buffing. That's essentially 3 avenues of buffing she enables, and with her resistance shred in particular, it's super good because like with Chevreuse, you don't need to do anything at all with the element like complicated double soul setups. You just need to have 2 Pyro, Electro, Cryo, or Hydro characters that exist in your teams. Where I see this gaining the most value is in Hydra DPS teams, as most attack scalers can just run Bennett, Kaza, Furina, and HP scalers don't really get that. So going back to a character like Nuvella or Mualani, they can replace Petra Zhongli on their teams with a character that shreds resistances harder and buffs more with the scroll set. So teams like Nuvella, Furina, Xilonen, Kazaha, and for Mualani a Zhangling, Xilonen, Furina team. Or just a Xilonen Zhangling core in general, and the last slot can be one of her supports, which I covered extensively in the guide I made for her. I calculate that she should be like a 15% increase over Zhongli on these teams for both Furina and Nuvellet's damage over using Zhongli, so do with that information what you will. But even then, she isn't just limited to only being for HP scalers. She should be usable with pretty much every DPS that isn't on Anemo or Dendro to some extent. Looking at Navia, she just got an upgrade to her Bennett Rina team with Kachina for being able to use the scroll set, and now you just add a 36% Geo rush shred on top of this, which is insane. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like she has prospects for Ito because she needs 2 swillable elements on her teams, where in Ito Mono J you don't really have that flexibility. Hu Tao also now finally has a way to resistance shred her pyro attacks on double Hydro teams. I'm not sure if this will be better than her plunge teams, but if you don't like the plunge playstyle, this should be your best bet in utilizing Hu Tao while keeping her traditional playstyle. And you also don't even really need double Hydro, and you also don't need this to be Hu Tao. Just have your pyro DPS of choice alongside Benna and Yolan. Another interesting application for her is in mono teams, because previously in setups like Mono Hydro, if you wanted an on-field DPS, Seedrune was being used as the healer, but with this you can just replace Seedrune with Xilonen Xilonen for even stronger buffing, with the same being applicable in monopyro teams replacing either Emily or Zhangling. Also, I know people are going to say it, no, you do not need to maximize Furina's fanfare. Even a small amount of healing is fine as long as the character provides other things, in which Xilonen provides a lot. I could also keep going with her team options, but pretty much wherever you use Kazuha you can use her, and her main upsides is that for characters without flexible rotations like Raiden, this gives you a way of constantly reapplying resistance shreds even in multi-wave content, which is the same upside Chevreuse has except you aren't tied to overload. There are also enemies with innate auras that most of the time can't be swirled by Kazuha, which is also an issue Xilonen won't run into. In terms of buffing profile, they're basically the same. Assuming a standard 10% resistance enemy, the difference between the res shred is 2%, which is less than a 1% damage difference. And unless your Kazuha has 1000 EM, which most don't because of energy needs, because of the scroll set, Xilonen actually ends up being a better buffer, especially when factoring things like buff uptime and especially in multi-wave, where Kazuha can't reapply buffs as easily. Though of course, Kazuha's grouping is pretty much the thing that makes him stand out nowadays, and Xilonen doesn't group or do swirl damage, which in teams like Quicken can be very valuable, so when grouping matters a lot, Kazuha is going to be better and vice versa. Comparing her to Petra Zhongli, this is a lot more simple, she quite literally just buffs more than him, and overall ends up being a 10 to 15% damage increase, depending on if there's another form of res shred on the team, etc. And she is also a healer, meaning she offers a solid form of sustain, so damage wise she's always going to be more ideal. The only grace you can give Zhongli is if the character needs IR. There are some people who can't play Nuvolette without a shielder, likewise with Mualani, and if you struggle with that she may not feel that impactful to you, otherwise she very easily replaces him. Lastly, comparing her to Kachina, she's a direct upgrade everywhere when there are two swirlable elements. The only case in which she isn't an upgrade is if you're using Chiori on the team, because Kachina has a Geo construct and therefore enables Chiori to do like double her damage. So Kachina still has her uses even with Xilonen out. I'm honestly surprised that Genshin managed to make a character as strong as Xilonen without making her just outright better than every other general support. And she can also just be used as a good duo supporting core, like there's nothing really stopping you from using Xilonen and Kazuha. The only thing I'm somewhat worried about regarding that is to a point buff stacking becomes less valuable, and she doesn't have a damage profile unlike someone like Furina, to where she can alleviate that. Resistant shreds have diminishing returns to where after 0% they are half as effective, so if you already have a form of resistant shred to Viridescent, adding Xilonen on top of this is of course a damage buff, but not as big as it may seem, to where you may be getting more value out of adding in another off-field DPS, which is shown through characters like Hu Tao or Raiden who commonly run a lot of off-field damage dealers. And even in Emily's case, her damage profile is so absurdly high that it's sometimes better to slot her in over using another buffer. So besides HP scaling DPS, Xilonen's best teams are generally going to be where she can just replace a support directly, like in Navia teams where she's just an upgrade to Kachina, Petra Zhongli teams, and of course Kazuha. Most Abyss lineups have a more single target oriented side and a more AoE oriented side. She allows you to run a Bennett Kazuha duo on one side and a Xilonen Furina duo on the other, which I think is extremely valuable. And she has some of the strongest buffs in the game with the quality of life the newer units have, so you don't need to do any complicated steps for her to work at all. She is probably the most flexible character we've had in the game since Furina, so overall a very good pull and a very good character. So with that, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment your thoughts on Xilonen, as I'd love to hear and respond to almost every single comment. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys on the flip side. Peace.